Great. Welcome everybody to the presentation. I'm going to pretty quickly just hand this over to Alex. Alex is a graduate or about to graduate from the Nicholas School of the Environment. Super amazing guy. And with that, Alex, take it away.
Thanks, Katie. Hi, thanks everyone for coming. I'm Alex. I did just graduate from the next school. My diploma is in the mail, supposedly. So this was the master's project that is my final thesis that I completed as part of that degree with my two partners who are not here today. I'll just be talking about my part of the project a little bit more in depth. So let me share my screen and we'll get this presentation going.
Forgot about what things so terrible.
I'm also going to mute everybody, so if you want to ask a question, please feel free to jump in or throw it in the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. If you think of any question, please, there's just so few of us here, feel free to speak out or just put your question in the chat and we'll get to it at the end. Plenty of time for that. Okay, so our project was called Planning a Sustainable Urban Tree Canopy for Durham. My part really focused on where do we need more trees? We know we want more trees, but where do we put them? So our project mission was to help Trees Durham specifically, but also the city of Durham and other partners to maintain and expand Durham's urban forest. So I'll start with a brief intro to the urban forest. Then I'll describe the current state of Durham's tree canopy with new data we developed as part of this project. And then I'll walk you through how I created a plan to prioritize tree planting in the city based on ecosystem services using geospatial data and GIS. So the urban forest is being increasingly recognized for the benefits that trees provide to a city's residents beyond, aesthetic value and habitat. Trees actually make up a vital part of a city's green infrastructure. And in fact, planting trees is one of the most efficient ways to provide a host of benefits to residents. Planting and maintaining more urban trees has been shown in study after study to improve air quality, water quality, physical health of the residents, mental well-being. Trees are also very effective at reducing the urban heat island effect by cooling down the area around them. Plus, a growing body of evidence suggests that parts of cities with more trees have significantly lower crime rates, both violent crime and property crime, even after other socioeconomic factors have been accounted for. So there are a lot of reasons to want more trees in your city. Fortunately, Durham has a large urban forest compared to a lot of American cities. About 52% of the land within Durham city limits, shown here, is covered by trees. And the city has stated a goal of increasing this to 55% citywide by 2040. So this map shows tree cover in Durham as of 2015, which is the most recent really accurate data we have, summarized in US Census blocks. And as you can see, overall tree cover is high, but uneven. Some parts of the city have very few trees, especially downtown, the more densely developed areas, compared to the more suburban areas that have high tree cover. Most of the over 4,000 census blocks have lower coverage than the goal of 55% for the city, and several hundred blocks have less than 15% tree cover. So this uneven distribution of trees is important because the location of urban trees matters. Where trees are planted and how they are distributed through a city can affect their ability to provide the ecosystem services to their residents. For example, the cooling effect of a tree on the air around it and the area around it is limited to a distance of about 5 times that tree's height. Because of things like this, studies indicate that a lot of small patches of trees or green space scattered throughout a city are much more beneficial than a few large parks, which cities tend to really like. So for something like Central Park in New York City, which is always popular, this huge green space in the middle of this really dense city, actually a lot of the benefits from it only directly affect the block or two surrounding the park. It's also worth noting that the benefit of ecosystem services can be calculated basically by benefit per number of people. So it's relative to the number of people that are around to benefit. So trees located near dense populations, like in the center of a city, can have a much higher return on investment. So why does Durham's canopy look this way? Part of the unevenness is a natural result of urban development, where natural land cover is replaced with dense buildings, roads, and parking lots. But part of it is a direct result of a history of environmental inequity in the city, as in many cities in the US. Especially starting in the 1930s, a racist policy by the Homeowners Loan Corporation, known as redlining, designated mostly minority neighborhoods as high-risk zones that were not eligible for government-supported loans. So these areas, shown here on this map in red, have received much less investment and improvement over the years as a result. And today, almost 100 years after redlining started, there are still significantly fewer trees in former redline districts than in low-risk areas in Durham. Tree cover in Durham is also significantly associated with socioeconomic factors this is from the US Census. We found that US Census blocks in Durham that have less tree cover are significantly more likely to have lower median household incomes, a greater percent of non-white residents, more people living under the poverty line, and a greater proportion of renters versus homeowners. So this is sort of a broadly known thing, but we found some new evidence behind it that more affluent neighborhoods have more trees. So considering all this, how do we decide where to plant trees in Durham? The city and organizations like Trees Durham obviously have very limited resources, so we want to choose locations where the new trees we plant can do the most good. One approach is really simple. Just plant trees where there aren't any. Target the lowest cover neighborhoods and try to fill them in with trees to try to even out the distribution of tree canopy. But how can we choose between multiple locations with the same level of tree cover? If here, like we're looking at lots of different census blocks that have about 10% tree cover, say, how do we decide where to go? So our solution was to prioritize where to plant trees based on the need for ecosystem services. So in other words, where in Durham do we have the most problems that trees can help fix? So I used geospatial data to create an evidence-based priority map based on some key ecosystem services. So to do this, I focused on 4 major ecosystem services provided by trees that are supported by the scientific literature and that can be mapped within the level of a city in some way. These were air pollution removal, extreme heat reduction, stormwater mitigation, which is absorption and removal of pollutants, and crime rate reduction. So for each of these 4 factors, I used geospatial data to generate a priority score, which shows where most of the problems exist in those areas. So for example, the hottest or most polluted parts of Durham would get high priority scores. Then I combined the scores of each of these 4 factors into one tree planting priority score that's adjusted according to resident preferences from a community survey that my team did. So this next part, as I get into the maps and methods, will be a little bit technical, but bear with me and feel free to ask questions either now or at the end. So for the first factor, air pollution removal, I modeled this is harmful air pollution, basically air pollution that would affect human health, using 2 types of data. The first was real data from the EPA that shows background concentration of diesel pollution, mostly from vehicles and industry uses at the census tract level. That's the map on the left, where darker indicates more polluted. The second was data that I developed modeled after studies in New York City. These identified buffers, corridors around major roads that experience heavy traffic. Residents that live close to roads like this often have higher rates of respiratory diseases like asthma as a result of that traffic pollution. So I combined these 2 layers to create this air priority score on the right, where darker red are higher score areas.
Alex?
Yes.
So Mary, did you have a question? And then I'll ask mine.
No, I didn't have a question.
Oh, okay. Sorry, that might have been MB. Your video is off. So Alex, 2 questions. I guess one, just to clarify, the map on the right, the
Yes.
darker colors are areas with higher air pollution. Is that correct?
They have the highest priority scores, which basically here represent, higher air pollution, where basically they have a higher priority for tree planting because there is more pollution predicted there. So those trees would be more beneficial because there's more pollution basically to remove.
Right. Okay. And then the second question is, I know that there's industry in Durham, like
Yes.
perhaps concrete or other things that might emit air pollutants. Were you able to get any data on the location or what was being emitted from that industrial work?
Yeah, I was not able to get good data on that. So I'll talk a little bit about the end about how with any prioritization like this, there's a lot of different kinds of data you could use. So this is a combination of one source of real measured data and one source of basically predicted pollution data, the road buffers. I did, look at, it would obviously be great if you knew exactly who the emitters were in Durham, how much of what kinds of things they're emitting. The data that was publicly available to me was not quite up to snuff for this analysis. It included a lot of places that may or may not have been shut down and didn't have good information about what or how much they were emitting. But for future analysis of this issue, I would definitely try to work on getting a better data set like that. That's a good area for follow-up. Okay, so that was the first factor. Second factor is extreme heat reduction. So this is the urban heat island effect, where certain areas of the city are hotter due to their more dense development. So this extreme heat priority score was calculated from Landsat 8 thermal satellite imagery of Durham taken during the summer. So this uses land surface temperature measured from space to show what parts of Durham tend to be hotter or cooler than average on a hot summer day. So in general, the most developed parts of the city with the least amount of trees and green space tend to be much hotter than areas with more trees and natural cover. And this can be a difference of over 10 degrees Fahrenheit on a summer day. In Durham, we see hotspots downtown, around major highways, and in suburban areas with lots of parking lots and shopping centers. So here, cooler spots are in blue, hotter are in red. You can sort of see hotspots downtown. Can you all see my mouse if I move it around? Okay, yeah, so downtown in the center here, this is South Square shopping center area, lots of huge parking lots and big box stores, areas like that. Tend to be, you can see it from space, noticeably hotter. So the third factor is stormwater mitigation. This is a combination, so this score is based on the ability of trees to slow down storm runoff and prevent some pollution from that water running off to reaching our streams. So this is crucial for Durham because all of the rain that falls on Durham eventually flows either north to Falls Lake or south to Jordan Lake, which are both drinking water sources for cities in the area. So this score also contains two factors. The first on the left identifies sub-watersheds with high amount of impervious surfaces, like those buildings and parking lots, which increase both the amount of runoff, the speed it goes into streams, and the amount of pollution that runoff contains. So this gives the highest priority score, shown darkest, to the Ellerby Creek subwatershed, which is known to be a pretty degraded stream leading right into Falls Lake, because it has the most impervious surface and includes most of downtown Durham and other heavily developed areas. So the second part of this score adds priority to riparian buffer zones around streams. So these are corridors of 50 and 100 feet around streams, where it's been shown that if we can maintain buffers of 50 or even better 100 feet around streams of plants, especially trees, you can do a lot to keep pollution from running off into those streams. So it's a high priority spot if you want to plant trees to prevent that. So these combined create the stormwater priority score on the right, again, where darker colors indicate higher priority score.
And just to clarify, so basically stormwater mitigation means reducing the amount of flooding and also cleaning the water. Is that right?
Yeah, so exactly. It's sort of the two parts of it. The one is that a tree slows water down a lot, both, when it rains, a tree holds water in its leaves. It can double the time water takes to actually touch the ground. Once it's there, a tree absorbs a lot of the water that falls. Its roots have created a more permeable soil. So all these factors basically lead to a higher retention time for water before it flows off downstream. And ultimately, the landscape scale effect of that is you can reduce flooding and carving out urban streams from that. So the final score was violent crime reduction, which I modeled directly off of almost 5 years of real crime data from the Durham PD. This is summarized within police sub-districts called beats, shown here on the map. The effect of trees on crime is somewhat controversial, but there's a growing body of evidence that higher tree cover is associated with lower crime rates, even when other related factors to crime like income are removed. In Durham, we found that violent crime rates are significantly lower in beats with more tree cover. So I assigned high tree planting priority to the beats with the most violent crime. It's here shown in the darkest purple.
So I'm going to take a minute to brag on you. This wasn't digital. You actually had to create this map. Like not even the police department have this digitally, right?
Yeah, so I found maps of the 5 PAC districts, which are themselves divided into these beats, just as PDFs online. Someone in the city probably might have this layer, but I drew it by hand, so that was a bit tedious. Okay, so after calculating the 4 ecosystem service scores, we wanted to combine these into one tree planting priority score by weighted averaging. So this is a way of expressing the importance of each of the 4 factors in the final score. So weighting can be done in a lot of ways, but we decided to turn to Durham's residents for this one. So my partner Grace conducted a community survey of many neighborhoods and focus groups in Durham. We ended up with about 670 complete responses. And in that survey, we asked, among many other things, we asked residents to rank these 4 ecosystem services in the order of importance in their opinion. So we used those responses to develop importance weights reflecting the input of the community. In general, residents thought that reducing air pollution and extreme heat were more important than stormwater or crime, as you can see here. Although I should note that when you think about this, it didn't surprise me that crime came in last, but that could also reflect the confidence in people that that connection is actually true. So it may have been ranked less important because people were skeptical of the relationship between trees and crime, which is something that anecdotally we heard a lot from people responding to our survey and in our focus groups. So using those importance weights, which shown on the left for their maps, we calculated the final tree planting priority score on the right. So this map combines those 4 ecosystem scores to show where new trees could have the most combined impact on air quality, heat, water quality, and violent crime. So the highest scores are shown in red and the lowest are in green, dark green being the lowest. And so here we can see some of the hotspots identified in this map. These are generally some of the most urbanized, densely developed parts of the city, which is not super surprising considering that's where we have the greatest amount of heat and air pollution, which are the 2 most important factors in this score. And this is where trees and green space have been replaced by impervious surfaces and where there's high amounts of traffic. So the map here uses really fine scale pixels, but for planning purposes, we can summarize this score to an average over priority parcels, census blocks, police beats, neighborhoods, really any unit that would be useful to decision makers on the ground. So here's an example of what this map looks like if you summarize the score by census blocks.
Hey, Alex.
Yeah.
Martin asked, did you investigate if the final score was very sensitive to the weights attached? So like, would this map change a lot if you changed the weights?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. Actually, I did, it's not shown here, but I did run a small sensitivity analysis on this stuff and found it to be pretty, I didn't look a large direction in either way, but small changes in the response would have a small change in the overall score. Yeah. Okay, so finally, I've also used this data to create this web map that allows anyone who wants to check it out, basically. So with this, you can look at any part of the city and see if it's a high priority zone for tree planting based on ecosystem services. It also shows you tree canopy cover and the amount of impervious surface. So I'm going to skim, I'll show you what that looks like. Did that move over? Are you all seeing the web map now? Cool. So this is HTML that we're hoping to embed in the TreesDurham website and make publicly available, which essentially takes this tree planting priority score we developed and puts it over a map of Durham. You can scroll in, you can see block by block, parcel by parcel, exactly what scores we've calculated for what area. You know, residents can look at their house and see if they're in a high priority district. You can come over here and look more finely at tree cover. So you can see exactly, this is still census blocks, percentage per census block, but you can see the uneven distribution in Durham, what parts of it really don't have much at all, like downtown. And then over here, as we get into Duke Forest, some much more forested parcels. And then often what looks like the inverse, here's the percent impervious score, where darker black represents more buildings, paved surfaces, parking lots, roads. So hopefully this will be a useful tool for outreach, sort of illustrating what the city really looks like and what opportunities there are for tree planting.
Hey, so this is a super cool map, and I really can't wait to nerd out on it. Is it possible to add layers for each one of those priority maps you made? So
Absolutely.
Like, I would love that, because I would be interested, like at my house, or like me and Scarlett's neighborhood, to just like turn on and off the air pollution layer, the air quality priority layer, and the crime priority layer. I think it would be fun to not only see the priority score, but also see like the different things that go into it.
Yeah, I can definitely work with you on that. This is basically a first draft. This is developed with Python script, so we can add all sorts of things to it or do different versions of it.
Does anyone else have other ideas while we're sort of looking at this map? Because I know Alex has more slides, but I'd love to hear y'all's initial thoughts on this.
I'm not sure if this is the right moment to ask, but I don't know. I guess you could do something similar to identify areas for preservation of existing tree cover. You probably would apply slightly different criteria, I'd imagine, but things like a watershed, well, maybe watershed in particular. I don't know, but yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely the other side of the coin to tree planting is preservation. So I myself have not done any work on that, but my partner Ming Fei, for his part of the thesis, was looking at mostly preservation through changes to the city code and how that would affect tree canopy coverage. But I think you're asking more about using ecosystem services and the value of trees to as criteria for preservation. I think that's a great idea. I've seen really similar work from that. There was a master's project from 3 Duke students last year who did that on a landscape scale for the entire Upper Neuse watershed, which Durham is about halfway in. It's the watershed basically leading to Falls Lake. They looked at all the land in that and did a similar prioritization of basically the value of land to preserving water quality as a metric for prioritizing conservation. So I can certainly forward that project to you. It was a great project they did for Triangle Land Conservancy was their client. Really cool
okay.
stuff.
Yeah, I'd be very interested in that.
Yeah. Alex, I would also be interested in that. To get to Martin's point, I wonder if you were to create, if you were to combine Martin, you could probably just look at the air quality and the crime beats, and those would give you some sense for, you know, if you wanted to prioritize crime, that would be the preservation. If you wanted to prioritize air quality, if you wanted to prioritize stormwater, I think that would be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess another way to look at it would be that if you think about it from a different perspective, this map sort of might already represent that basically this is showing, you know, we're calling this tree planting priority score, but really it's a map saying where is there the most need for tree ecosystem services. And so if you look at a high priority red area, you're saying, okay, we really could plant some trees here and solve these issues, but it's also saying that any trees that are there are high priority preservation trees because that's a red zone, so we don't want to take anything else out of this area that's really in need of those services, I guess would be my final word on that.
That's a really important point. And I think that's also a really powerful point because some of these areas that you're looking at are being redeveloped. So your mouse is basically on South Side, which is undergoing redevelopment, and we're losing a lot of our mature canopy, and we're also in the high priority for air pollution, crime, and I would imagine water. There's a stream that runs right through here.
Yeah. And every tree you take out, you know, even if you replant a tree, it could take decades to start providing the same level of ecosystem services to that neighborhood.
Yeah, I guess the one layer that kind of skews it towards the areas away from the areas where there are trees in this current map is the temperature layer, because I think the temperature is very much correlated with existing tree cover, right? The others are sort of independent of tree cover as they are right now. Mm-hmm. So maybe if you took that out, you kind of would see more clearly where the existing trees are like important to maintain the other services that are being provided.
I see. Yeah, you're probably right.
I think in that way, Martin, you would be looking more at forest preservation as opposed to tree preservation.
That's
which are
totally true.
Similar but subtly different.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's mostly what I had. Just a quick wrap up here that, like I said, with any geospatial prioritization, there are a lot of ways you can make a map like this. Other sources of data for these services, we already discussed for air pollution that we would really love to have more specific data about emitters. I'd also really love to have more real data about the actual air pollution in the air besides just this one from the EPA. But a lot of the direct measuring is kind of at a scale so coarse that it wasn't really useful for this project. We could also consider completely different ecosystem services, adding or subtracting, you know, ones that you think might not be important. Someone redoing this in the future could decide, you know what, we really care a lot about the physical health benefits of trees. So that's hard to model spatially, but let's give it a shot and see what data we can put together on that. So this is intended to be a starting point, a first step, a tool that you can use on the ground to make decisions about how to build up this forest and help people as quickly and as efficiently as possible. There's certainly room for improvement. I'm really excited to see that Katie Rose has already mentioned trying to get some other students to work on this. I'd be very excited to see where we could go with this project. But our hope is that, again, this map will be used by Trees Durham, the city, other partners to direct tree planting efforts to locations where we think they can do the most good in terms of providing ecosystem services to everyone that lives here.
So Alex, if you're switching slides, we can't see that. We just see the discussion slide.
Oh, yeah, that's all. And then
Okay.
this. So yeah, thanks to Katie Rose, my client, and my partners who aren't here today, but did incredible work. Our entire thesis is available publicly on Duke Space. I'm sure Katie Rose has a link to that. Mm-hmm. And I'm completely blanking on Ryan. The MP I mentioned from last year, another really cool one about the importance of landscape, particularly for water quality preservation in this region. I can send that link along as well for anyone who would like.
Yeah, we'll when you send that link along, I'll add it to the website, and also the other study that you mentioned that was in 2016 that looked at the how the demographics of Durham relate to its current tree canopy. That will also be on the website, and there's a presentation on that tomorrow morning. So you are generating a lot of really helpful real-time data. So at the beginning, MB asked about a new gas line going from Apex to downtown Durham via the easement of the American Tobacco Trail. I have not heard of that, and I don't think, Alex, you worked with any sort of easements, did you?
No, I just heard about that on NPR a few hours ago. It's the first I'd heard of it. Yeah, I don't know much about it, but I hope they don't take out too many trees for it.
Yeah, I think that that is definitely something that Trees Durham should, me and I think also Trees Durham is interested in general. Easements are very challenging because you're not allowed to grow trees on them. So the more easements you have, the more challenging it is to create a comprehensive tree cover. At the same time, it's really great to have easements in the middle of things like roads where you couldn't grow trees anyway. So other questions?
It's really fascinating to see Southside is just such a red area on all the layers, but it really shows how much difference it will make when all these little trees get bigger. And then too, I think there's a lot of, this is such good education for some of the people that have moved in and purchased homes who really haven't planted trees. I think it's hard for people to learn the lesson that the best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago, you know? So everything that you do really helps like now and in the future. So I feel like I noticed a lot of the areas that were cleared with the initial development, not a lot of trees have been planted by newer occupants.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Scarlett. There's two parts to the point you just made. The first is we have regulations that are allowing like clearing and loss of trees. Like Alex pointed out, in Southside is a good example because, like you said, we're looking at it. It's sort of a high priority area, and it's quickly turning over, and they're small scale. So every large tree that's in Southside is really important because it's contributing a lot, and it's in a place where we need trees. So we need regulations and ordinances to protect the trees that are there when developers are coming in. And also, once residents move in and take control of the land, we need really aggressive programs that help people add new trees to their land. Because big trees have bigger, like really big impacts, exponentially more impact than small trees. So we need both the planting and the preservation. And so that's like developers and residents.
Yeah, exactly. Like stronger, developers are only required to do such minimal landscaping or, vegetation for new construction. And I think you've really seen the impact of that in Southside for these first 3 to 5 years where certain lots are turning over and not really much has been planted until Trees Durham, that has been helping. There are more, but it's still not enough.
Alex, when you were looking at, what are your thoughts about, you pointed out downtown Durham, you pointed out South Square, a lot of those are large parking lots. Can you talk a little bit more about about that idea, the possibility for trees, or just some things that came up that surprised you as you were doing this work?
Yeah, I guess it sort of the more results I got, this result really isn't surprising in a lot of ways. Considering the sort of services we were looking at, it's not surprising that it ended up targeting the most dense parts of the city. But I think this just highlights the idea that a citywide goal is admirable, but it's not really adequate to solving the problems that trees solve. That, there's 52% tree cover in Durham. That's really good. And we're probably on track to get to that 55%. But if you look at that map, this big rural swath of heavy forest up here, even though it's within city limits, it's not doing anything for a lot of the residents that live in this city. And so I really think this focus on redistributing to distribute these services to where people live. And that's going to, be hard. And I think that's good, but that attention should change how this sort of stuff is done. That, be a lot easier to add about a trees to a rural lot, but it's going to do a lot less good. So whether that sort of changes the equation to thinking maybe one tree in a street with no trees on it that we wedged in between two parking lots, maybe that's worth that extra cost, even though you could plant 10 trees for the same cost, in a rural lot somewhere. Just sort of shifting the way we think about this priority is sort of the big picture that emerged for me from doing this project.
If you take what you just said in the context of Ming Fei's work, which is where a tree is being preserved, these big rural areas that are dark green right now are not protected at all. So you can assume that under regular development, these will go from 80 to 90% to after pre-development to 10% post-development.
Right.
So not only are they not helping residents now, once people move into that space, there won't be the same tree cover to help residents then either. Well, any final thoughts?
I'm also interested in some of the research that's coming out about how like trees that are growing within a community of trees are so much more healthy than trees that are growing alone. And I wonder if, just looking at this research and you talking about how preservation of trees within a red area is so important, it also makes me think about, because those trees are kind of lonely in that red area, preservation is more important. And if there's any more room to have more densely planted areas within that red area too. Like I know a lot of our code dictates how densely we plant devil strips, or how densely developers have to plant buffers. And I wonder if some of those could be changed to allow for more density and the positives and negatives that comes with it. I know that's a big question. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a really interesting issue. It's a good example of the kinds of added complexity that you have to tackle if you really want to target these very urbanized areas for tree planting, which I guess in response, I'll say I'm not a forester. My partner Ming Fei is a forester. So as far as physical health of individual trees, I'm not an expert, but I do know it sort of depends on species, that some tree species really do a lot better in a forest stand, but actually a lot of urban trees, because they are a little more alone on a block and have full access to sunlight, some urban trees thrive in a way that they wouldn't in a forest stand. Not really answering your question, but it's just another thing to consider in these situations. But
Yeah,
health is important to consider in these things.
I would so agree with what Alex said, that when trees, a lot of the trees that we plant can be considered somewhat primary trees, or they're lowland trees, so maybe they're able to take advantage of full sun. And also, so that's why you get the willow oaks that are along our streets that are like 100 feet tall and 60 feet wide, where if they're competing in a forest canopy, they might not get as tall, and they certainly wouldn't get as wide. So there's that's some of the reason behind these spacings and the double strips, or the space between the road and the sidewalk. Also, when trees are planted more densely together, they can create a microclimate that makes them all more healthy. So there's opportunities, like Alex was saying, smaller distributed parks are more effective. There's opportunities to create these small pockets of densely planted areas that have bigger effects than if that same area only had one large tree. They're also more resilient in the face of climate change and introduce pests. So there's a lot of reasons to do what you're saying, EB, not just from like a tree's social health standards, so to speak, but from a like resiliency and climate adaptivity, and really just ecosystem service provision standpoint. More leaves, you get more air pollution removal, you get more stormwater treatment, and that can come from different types and sizes of trees. And Tanya said, both Keep Durham Beautiful and the city have tracked where we've planted trees each year using OpenTreeMap. So I would be interested, Alex, is it possible to integrate the city's OpenTreeMap data into this? Or is that like another project?
I haven't used OpenTreeMap very much, but I do know that for this city, the only trees that are on it are city maintained trees that are in the city rights of way. So it's essentially just the roadside trees that the city owns. So it's a very small portion of the map that they have detailed species and age information for.
Yeah, I think that is very true. One thing it reflects is the civic investment in tree planting. So it would be interesting to see that as a layer. I think that this map has a lot of really nice possibilities because you're putting meaning into the data, right? And so then adding something like that would help you see where we're investing and where we're not. Like, for example, we could put on the Trees Durham maps into the city's OpenTreeMap and see, oh, there has been a cluster of planting here, here, and here. But as you pointed out, it wouldn't be comprehensive. Alex, final thoughts, and then we'll let everybody go.
Yeah, just thanks everyone for showing up. I will try to send along those MPs to you. If anyone has any follow-up questions, I'm alexander.vanko@duke.edu, and I'll put that in chat here. The full report's online. My partners did really great work. I think it's pretty cool if you just want to skim through it. Otherwise, thanks for coming, and go plant some trees.
That's great. We also, this recording will be up online under Trees Durham. There's a little thing that says about trees. So it has a link to their report. It has a link to right now 3 presentations, and then this will go up. So that'll be the 4th, which is all of them together doing the comprehensive report, and then the 3 breakout sessions. So the one on the survey, the one on planning and its impact on the future of Durham's trees, and this one, the planting prioritization. They also did a really great tree review of all the research, or a lot of the research into these ecosystem services. So that is on there along with all the references they used. So you can get as nerdy as you want and read the 100-page report and go through a lot of the resources like I'm doing, or you can just skim what they wrote and pick up a lot of information from that too. So we are so lucky to have you, Alex, and your partners, and the quality of information you put together. And we hope that, I think it's going to make a real impact, a positive impact in Durham. So thank you.
Hope so too.
All
Thanks,
right.
everyone.
Bye.